Sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who quietly return to the same place every day, hoping to feel something again. The soft hum of espresso machines and quiet jazz drifted through Bellamy Café like a warm blanket against the freezing Manhattan morning. Outside, January wind rattled the windows while yellow taxi lights streaked across the wet streets. But inside, everything glowed amber and calm. Claire Bennett balanced 3 ceramic mugs carefully against her arm as she moved between tables with the kind of practiced grace that came from exhaustion disguised as routine. "Large vanilla latte for Sarah," she called softly, setting the cup down with a tired smile that somehow still looked genuine. Customers loved her for that smile. They didn't know it cost her almost everything some days. At exactly 8:15 every morning, the bell above the cafe door chimed once. Claire didn't even need to look anymore. "Americano. No sugar," she said automatically while wiping the counter. "Already started it," called Marcus from behind the espresso machine. The quiet man walked in wearing the same charcoal wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes. Tall, dark hair touched by winter rain. Calm blue eyes that never lingered too long on anyone except her. He always chose the same table beside the window. Same chair. Same posture. Same silence. Claire glanced at him briefly as she carried over the steaming cup. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he answered. His voice was low, smooth, almost careful, like someone who measured every word before letting it exist. She placed the Americano in front of him. "Looks like snow all day," she added politely. He looked toward the gray sky outside. Some storms stay longer than people expect. Claire blinked once. That sounds depressing for before 9 a.m. For the first time that morning, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a full smile. Just enough to surprise her. "Sorry. It's okay," she laughed softly. "You're still less depressing than the stockbrokers." She motioned discreetly toward 2 loud men arguing over cryptocurrency near the back wall. The quiet man glanced over, then back at her. "That's a low bar." Claire smiled again before moving away to greet another customer, but she felt it again. That feeling. The strange awareness that he was watching her. Not in a creepy way. Not invasive. More like studying sunlight through glass. She noticed it weeks ago. Maybe months. He never flirted. Never asked personal questions. Never interrupted her while she worked. He simply sat there every morning for almost 2 hours with his untouched second cup of coffee growing cold while his eyes followed her around the cafe like she was the only peaceful thing in New York City. Claire didn't know his name. The receipt always said EC, because he paid with a black card Marcus once described as the kind billionaires probably carry. But if he was rich, he didn't act like it. No flashy watch. No loud phone calls. No arrogance. Just silence. Strange, heavy silence. Around 10 a.m., Claire disappeared briefly into the employee restroom and stared at herself in the mirror under the harsh fluorescent light. Her blonde hair had slipped loose from its messy bun again. There were faint shadows under her green eyes she couldn't hide anymore. She pressed cold fingers against her temples and exhaled slowly. Rent was overdue. Mia's medication refill was due Friday. The electric bill sat unopened in her coat pocket because she already knew she couldn't pay it yet. "You okay?" Marcus asked through the door. Claire forced energy back into her voice instantly. "Yep." "You sure?" "Totally." Silence. Then Marcus sighed softly. "You don't always have to pretend, Claire." Her smile faded a little as she stared at her reflection. Maybe he was right. But pretending was cheaper than falling apart. When she returned to the cafe floor, she noticed the quiet man watching snow fall through the window, his untouched Americano cooling beside his hands. Something about him looked different today. Worse somehow. His shoulders tighter. His jaw rigid. Like he hadn't slept in days. Claire hesitated before walking over. "You want a refill?" she asked gently. He looked up almost like she'd interrupted something painful. "No, thank you." She nodded, but didn't leave immediately. "You know," she said carefully, "most people come here for coffee. You come here like you're hiding from something." His eyes met hers fully then, and for one strange second, the entire cafe seemed to disappear around them. "Maybe I am," he admitted quietly. Claire swallowed unexpectedly. She didn't know why those words affected her so much. Maybe because she understood them too well. Before she could answer, the bell above the cafe door rang loudly again as a little girl rushed inside with her mother, cheeks pink from the cold. "Miss Claire," the girl shouted happily. Claire immediately knelt down with a grin. Well, look who survived the blizzard. The child giggled while Claire fixed the crooked scarf around her neck. The quiet man watched silently as Claire handed the little girl an extra chocolate chip cookie by accident. He watched the mother thank her. Watched Claire laugh softly when powdered sugar landed on her apron. Watched the warmth in her eyes that seemed completely natural, completely effortless. And something inside Ethan Cole hurt all over again. Because 6 months ago, on a freezing bridge soaked in rain and regret, he had forgotten what kindness sounded like until a stranger with trembling hands looked at him and said, "Hey, I know life feels impossible right now, but please don't stand that close to the edge." She didn't remember him. Of course she didn't. To Claire Bennett, that night was probably just another passing moment in New York. Another stranger she tried to help before hurrying back into her own impossible life. But to Ethan, it was the night someone accidentally gave him a reason to survive until morning. His phone vibrated sharply against the wooden table. Oliver Grant flashed across the screen. Ethan ignored it. Seconds later, another message appeared. Board meeting moved to noon. Press is asking questions again. You cannot keep disappearing every morning. Ethan stared at the text before locking the phone without replying. Across the cafe, Claire laughed quietly while helping an elderly customer zip her winter coat. Sunlight briefly broke through the clouds outside, washing gold across the windows and catching in Claire's hair like something out of an old movie Ethan once loved before life became meetings and headlines and empty penthouses filled with silence. He wrapped both hands around the cooling coffee cup and watched her move through the cafe again. Light, warm, alive, and for the first time in months, the crushing pressure in his chest loosened just enough for him to breathe normally. Claire glanced toward him one more time, catching him staring again. "You know," she teased lightly while grabbing empty plates from a nearby table, "one day I'm going to start charging you for emotional observation." Ethan looked down briefly, almost embarrassed. Then he surprised her again. "Maybe it's worth it." Claire smiled despite herself. But neither of them noticed the black SUV slowly pulling to the curb outside Bellamy Café, while two men in dark coats stepped onto the sidewalk, scanning the windows until one of them quietly pointed toward Ethan sitting alone beside the glass. Claire noticed the men outside before she understood why her stomach suddenly tightened. They stood beside the black SUV in long dark coats despite the snow beginning to fall harder across Lexington Avenue. And even through the fog cafe windows, something about them felt expensive, controlled, dangerous in the way wealthy people sometimes were without meaning to be. Marcus leaned closer behind the counter while steaming milk. "Please tell me those guys are not here for you," he whispered. Claire rolled her eyes lightly. "Yeah, because my secret criminal empire finally caught up to me." But her attention drifted back toward the quiet man by the window. Ethan sat completely still now, jaw tense, fingers wrapped around the coffee cup like he suddenly regretted coming there at all. One of the men outside pressed a finger against an earpiece before opening the SUV door. Claire frowned slightly. Okay, that is definitely weird. The bell above the cafe door chimed again as the taller man stepped inside. Cold wind swept briefly through the warm room, carrying the scent of snow and Manhattan traffic. The entire cafe seemed quieter instantly. The man scanned the room once before walking directly toward Ethan. "Mr. Cole," he said calmly, "we have been looking for you." Claire froze halfway through wiping a table. "Mr. Cole." Ethan looked up slowly, annoyance flickering across his face. "I told you not to come here. Your 10 o'clock was moved twice. Mr. Grant is asking for you." Ethan exhaled once through his nose, exhausted more than angry. "I know." Claire stared at him harder now. "Cole, why did that name sound familiar?" Ethan finally noticed her expression, and something unreadable passed across his eyes. Almost regret. "Claire," he said quietly, "could I get one more coffee before I leave?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, sure." Her pulse felt strange as she moved back toward the espresso machine. Marcus leaned immediately toward her. "Cole," he mouthed dramatically. Claire shook her head. "I do not know." But somewhere in the back of her mind, recognition scratched faintly like a song she almost remembered. She handed Ethan the fresh Americano a minute later. Their fingers brushed briefly against the warm paper cup. "You have security?" she asked carefully, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Ethan glanced toward the men waiting near the entrance. "Unfortunately." "Who are you exactly?" she asked before she could stop herself. For a second, Ethan looked like he might actually answer honestly. Instead, he gave a faint, tired smile. Just someone who likes your coffee. Claire folded her arms. That answer sounds illegal. A quiet laugh escaped him then, low and real enough to surprise both of them. God, she realized suddenly, he almost never laughs. The thought hit her strangely hard. Ethan stood slowly, buttoning his coat while snow drifted behind him through the cafe windows. He reached into his wallet and placed several folded bills beside the untouched second coffee. You always tip too much, Claire said automatically. Maybe your coffee is worth it. It is diner coffee in a Brooklyn-sized paper cup. Still worth it. Their eyes held a second too long. Then one of the men near the door cleared his throat gently, reminding Ethan of whatever world waited outside these windows. Ethan looked back at Claire again. See you tomorrow? The question sounded strangely uncertain for a man who carried himself like power usually obeyed him. Claire shrugged softly. Depends. Snow might kill us all overnight. Another almost smile touched his face. Then I hope we survive. He turned and walked toward the exit while the two men followed close behind. The moment the door closed behind him, Marcus rushed over instantly. Claire Bennett, he whispered harshly. What in God's name is happening? Nothing is happening. Men with security details do not drink $6 coffee every morning for 3 straight months because nothing is happening. Claire grabbed the dirty mugs defensively. He just likes the cafe. Marcus stared at her. Sweetheart, that man looks at you like you are the last sunrise on earth. Claire opened her mouth to deny it, but stopped. Because part of her knew Marcus was right. She had felt it for weeks now. Those quiet eyes following her around the cafe. The strange sadness in them. The way Ethan listened when she spoke, even about meaningless things. Like every word mattered. She shook the thought away quickly. You are dramatic. Marcus smirked. And you are blind. By noon, the snowstorm thickened into heavy white sheets that swallowed most of Manhattan in gray silence. Bellamy Café emptied slowly until only a few customers remained scattered near outlets with laptops and half-finished pastries. Claire checked her phone behind the counter. 3 missed calls from Mia. Her stomach tightened instantly. She called back immediately. Hey, are you okay? She asked softly. Her younger sister's voice sounded weak through the speaker. Yeah, sorry. I just forgot to tell you I have another doctor appointment Friday. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Another appointment meant another bill. Another prescription refill. Another week pretending everything was manageable when it was not. Okay, Claire said gently. I will figure it out. Claire, Mia hesitated. You do not always have to fix everything. Claire forced a smile into her voice automatically. Big sisters literally do. After hanging up, she stared down at the cracked screen of her phone for several long seconds before slipping it back into her apron pocket. Bad news. Mrs. Green asked quietly while restocking pastries nearby. Claire shrugged. Normal news. The older woman gave her a knowing look. Mrs. Green had owned Bellamy Café for almost 30 years and somehow possessed the terrifying ability to read emotions before people admitted having them. That man cares about you, she said suddenly. Claire nearly dropped the sugar packets in her hand. What? The quiet one. Claire laughed nervously. He does not even know me. Mrs. Green smiled faintly while adjusting a tray of croissants. Sometimes lonely people recognize each other before they know names. Claire looked away too fast. Outside, the snow continued falling softly across Manhattan, while traffic crawled through slush-covered streets below glowing holiday lights. Somewhere uptown, Ethan Cole sat inside the back seat of his SUV, staring at Bellamy Café, disappearing behind sheets of white snow. You missed another board meeting for coffee, Oliver said sharply through the speakerphone. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw tiredly. I know. This has to stop. Silence filled the car for several seconds before Ethan finally spoke again. Do you know what the strange thing is? Oliver sighed heavily. What? Ethan looked back toward the cafe one last time through the snowy glass. When I am there, the noise in my head finally goes quiet. Oliver said nothing after that. Because for the first time in nearly a year, Ethan Cole sounded less like a billionaire collapsing under pressure and more like a man trying very carefully to stay alive. By Friday morning, the storm had buried Manhattan beneath almost 14 inches of snow, turning the city into a blur of white rooftops, slushy sidewalks, and exhausted people clutching paper coffee cups for survival. Bellamy Café smelled like cinnamon, wet coats, and fresh espresso, The windows fogged from the warmth inside, while snowflakes spiraled endlessly beyond the glass. Claire tied her apron quickly behind her back, while balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear. Mia, I already told you I can cover the prescription. Her sister sighed softly on the other end. Claire, it is $600. Claire grabbed a stack of menus with one hand. Then I will work more shifts. You already work 6 days a week. Welcome to capitalism. Mia laughed weakly despite herself, and hearing that tiny laugh loosened something in Claire's chest. Promise me you will sleep eventually, Mia whispered. Claire glanced toward the cafe door as another gust of snow swept outside. No promises. She hung up just as the bell above the entrance chimed once. 8:15. Claire looked up automatically before she could stop herself. Ethan stepped inside, carrying winter cold around him like silence wrapped in wool. Snow dusted his dark coat and melted slowly against the fabric while his eyes searched the cafe until they landed on her. There it was again, that strange pause in his expression, like seeing her mattered too much. Claire hated that she noticed it now. Morning, she said while reaching for a cup before he even ordered. Morning. His voice sounded rougher today, tired around the edges. Ethan sat at his usual window table while outside, people hurried through snowdrifts with heads lowered against the wind. Claire placed the Americano in front of him carefully. You survived the blizzard. Barely. You look like you slept in your car. Ethan glanced down at the coffee cup. Close. Claire frowned slightly. She could not explain why concern came so naturally with him. Maybe because nobody looked at Ethan Cole the way he actually looked. Most wealthy men in Manhattan moved through rooms like polished machines. Ethan moved like someone carrying invisible weight across his shoulders every second of the day. You okay? She asked quietly before she could overthink it. Ethan looked up slowly. For one brief moment, something vulnerable flashed across his face so quickly she almost imagined it. Not really, he admitted. Claire blinked. Most people lied automatically after that question. Especially men. Especially powerful men. But Ethan answered honestly, and somehow that honesty felt heavier than if he had said nothing at all. Well, she said softly while adjusting the sugar jars beside his table. For what it is worth, this cafe has terrible coffee but excellent emotional support. Ethan let out the faintest breath of laughter. I noticed. She smiled before walking away toward another customer, but she felt his eyes follow her again. Not possessive, not shallow, just quietly present, like he was afraid to look away too long. Around 9 a.m., the morning rush exploded. Bellamy Cafe filled with soaked commuters escaping the cold, laptops opening beside pastries, while jazz hummed low through hidden speakers overhead. Claire moved quickly between tables, balancing steaming mugs along her arms, while Marcus shouted drink orders behind clouds of espresso steam. Double mocha for Rachel. Blueberry scone warmed up. Large drip coffee. Claire laughed breathlessly while spinning past customers. One crisis at a time, people. Near the entrance, an elderly man stepped carefully inside, carrying snow across the floor with worn boots and trembling hands. Claire recognized him immediately. Mr. Calloway. He came in every Friday morning, but rarely ordered more than plain tea because he could not afford much else. Today he looked colder than usual. Morning, Mr. Calloway. Claire greeted warmly. You staying warm out there? The old man smiled tiredly. Trying my best. Claire glanced discreetly toward the register, then leaned closer. Blueberry muffin accidentally burned this morning, she whispered dramatically. Guess somebody should eat it before Mrs. Green sees. The old man's eyes softened instantly because both of them knew she was lying. You are too kind. Terrible business strategy, she agreed lightly, sliding the warm pastry toward him anyway. Across the cafe, Ethan watched the entire exchange without touching his coffee. Something tightened painfully in his chest again. Claire did these things constantly. Quiet little kindnesses no cameras saw. Refilling cups before people asked. Listening when lonely customers talked too long. Pretending free food was an accident to save someone dignity. She moved through the world gently in ways most people had forgotten how to do. Ethan had spent years surrounded by wealth so loud it demanded attention from everyone around it. Claire's goodness was the opposite. Quiet. Invisible almost. Which somehow made it matter more. His phone buzzed again against the table. Oliver. Ethan ignored it. 30 seconds later, another message appeared. Investors are furious. Where are you? Ethan stared at the glowing screen before locking it without answering. Because for the first time in months, sitting inside Bellamy Café watching snow collect outside the windows while Claire laughed softly at something Marcus said, he did not feel like drowning beneath his own life. He felt human. Claire passed by his table again, carrying clean dishes. You know, she teased lightly. Normal people usually drink their coffee before it turns into ice water. Ethan looked down at the untouched cup. I got distracted. By what? The question slipped out casually, but Ethan's eyes lifted directly to hers again. Claire instantly regretted asking because something about the way he looked at her suddenly made her pulse stumble awkwardly against her ribs. You, he answered simply. Silence. Real silence this time. Even the jazz music seemed farther away for half a second. Claire stared at him, completely caught off guard. Ethan seemed surprised he said it aloud too. He looked down briefly, almost embarrassed. Sorry, he murmured. That sounded strange. Claire swallowed once. A little. But her cheeks felt warm suddenly, and she hated that Marcus immediately noticed from behind the counter because his grin became absolutely unbearable. Ethan rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw before speaking again. I just mean, you make this place feel calm. Claire looked at him more carefully now. Really looked. Dark circles beneath his eyes. The tension hiding in his shoulders. The exhaustion buried beneath expensive fabric and controlled posture. This was not flirting. Or at least not only flirting. This felt more honest than that. More dangerous too. You should probably sleep more, she said softly. Ethan almost smiled again. You sound like someone else I know. Smart person? Persistent person. Claire leaned lightly against the chair opposite him for just a second. You can tell me to mind my business if you want. Ethan studied her quietly. I do not want to. Their eyes held again before the sharp ringing of Claire's phone shattered the moment. She glanced at the screen, and her stomach dropped instantly. Midtown Medical Center. I need to take this, she whispered quickly. Ethan nodded at once while Claire hurried toward the hallway near the employee restroom. Hello. Her voice shook slightly already. A nurse spoke gently on the other end. Miss Bennett, your sister experienced another reaction this morning during observation. She is stable, but the doctor would like to discuss adjusting treatment. Claire closed her eyes hard. Is she okay? She is resting now. Relief flooded through her, so suddenly her knees weakened against the wall. But then came the next fear immediately after. Treatment adjustment meant more tests. More bills. More impossible numbers she could not afford. Claire pressed trembling fingers against her forehead while trying to breathe normally. Okay, she whispered. I will come after work. When she finally stepped back onto the cafe floor several minutes later, she forced a smile automatically into place. But Ethan noticed immediately. Of course he did. He stood quietly from his table as she approached the counter. Something happened, he said softly. Claire shook her head too fast. It is nothing. Ethan looked at her carefully for a long moment before reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a folded napkin. You left this on my table yesterday. Claire unfolded it automatically. A quick pencil sketch stared back at her. Ethan sitting beside the cafe window with snow falling outside behind him. She had drawn it absent-mindedly during slow hours and forgotten completely. At the bottom corner, she had scribbled one line without thinking. Some people look lonely even in warm rooms. Claire's face flushed instantly. Oh my God. Ethan watched her gently. You drew me. I draw everybody. Not like this. Claire looked down at the sketch again, embarrassed by how much emotion she accidentally captured in his eyes. You were not supposed to see that. Ethan's voice lowered softly. I am glad I did. And for the first time since that terrible phone call, Claire felt her breathing steady again. That night, Manhattan glowed silver beneath fresh snow while Claire Bennett sat alone on the downtown subway, clutching her sketchbook against her chest like it contained something fragile enough to break. The train rattled through underground darkness, fluorescent lights flickering softly overhead, while exhausted strangers leaned against windows half asleep after another impossible Friday. Claire stared at Ethan's sketch resting open across her lap. Some people look lonely even in warm rooms. She traced the pencil lines absent-mindedly with cold fingertips, embarrassed all over again that he had seen it. Worse, that he understood it. Outside the subway window, tunnels blurred past like shadows. Claire leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes briefly. She should have been thinking about hospital bills. About Mia's treatment. About rent overdue by 11 days. Instead, she kept replaying Ethan's voice in her head. I am glad I did. Nobody had ever looked at one of her sketches like it mattered before. Most people called drawing a hobby. Childish. Temporary. But Ethan held that napkin sketch like she accidentally handed him something important. The subway screeched to a stop near 14th Street. Claire stepped onto the snowy sidewalk, pulling her coat tighter around herself as icy wind whipped through the avenue. Her apartment building stood 3 blocks away above a laundromat with flickering neon lights and radiators that worked only when they felt emotionally available. She climbed the narrow stairs quietly before unlocking the apartment door. "Mia?" she called gently. "Kitchen." Claire stepped inside the tiny apartment smelling faintly of tomato soup and old books. Mia sat curled beneath a blanket at the table wearing oversized gray sweatpants and exhaustion beneath her smile. "You look frozen," Mia said softly. "New York is trying to kill everybody equally." Claire hung her coat by the heater before moving toward the stove automatically. "Did you eat?" "Some." Claire lifted the soup pot lid skeptically. "Define some." Mia smiled weakly. "Emotionally, a lot." Claire laughed under her breath while grabbing bowls from the cabinet. The apartment was small enough that both sisters could hear the old pipes groaning behind the walls whenever neighbors showered upstairs. Their couch had a permanent dip in the middle. The kitchen light buzzed faintly, but somehow it still felt warmer than most expensive places Claire had ever entered. "Doctor said they want to adjust treatment," Mia said quietly after a moment. Claire froze slightly while ladling soup. "Okay. Which means more tests." Claire nodded once without looking up. "Okay." Mia studied her sister carefully. "Claire." "What?" "You are doing the thing again." Claire carried the soup bowls over. "What thing?" "The pretending everything is fine thing." Claire sat down slowly across from her. Steam curled softly between them while snow tapped against the windows outside. "I just need more hours," Claire murmured. "You already work constantly." "Then I will work constantly harder." Mia looked down at her soup sadly. "I hate this." Claire immediately reached across the table for her hand. "Hey, none of this is your fault." "I know, but I still hate watching you disappear because of me." Claire squeezed her fingers gently. "You are not ruining my life, Mia." Her sister's eyes glistened faintly. "Then why do you always look tired now?" Claire did not answer right away. Because the truth was exhaustion had become so normal, she barely recognized herself without it anymore. The truth was she could not remember the last time someone asked how she was doing and actually waited for the answer. Except maybe one quiet man sitting beside a cafe window every morning. Claire shook the thought away quickly. Dangerous thought. Stupid thought. Mia noticed anyway because younger sisters always noticed everything. "It is the coffee guy, isn't it?" Claire nearly choked on soup. "What?" Mia smirked weakly. "Marcus posted a blurry photo of you two on his Instagram story. I'm going to physically fight Marcus." "Too late. I already zoomed in." Claire groaned loudly while dropping her forehead briefly against the table. Mia laughed softly for the first time all evening. "So who is he?" "Nobody." "Claire. Seriously. He just comes into the cafe every day and stares at you like a tragic movie character apparently." Claire rolled her eyes. "You sound exactly like Marcus." "So I am right." Claire leaned back in her chair slowly. "He is strange." "Strange bad?" "No," she hesitated. "Strange sad." Mia tilted her head slightly. "Sad recognizes sad." Claire looked away immediately toward the snow outside the window. Maybe that was exactly the problem. Across Manhattan, Ethan stood alone inside his penthouse apartment 32 floors above the city, while floor-to-ceiling windows reflected endless white lights across polished marble and silence too expensive to feel human. The place looked like a luxury magazine spread no one actually lived in. Minimal furniture. Perfect lighting. Untouched kitchen counters. Beautiful emptiness. Ethan loosened his tie slowly while Oliver paced nearby holding a tablet full of financial reports and frustration. "You missed another investor call today," Oliver said sharply. 3 board members are threatening to pull support if you keep disappearing every morning." Ethan poured himself water without responding. "And the press already noticed your schedule changes." Still silence. Oliver exhaled heavily. "Ethan, look at me." Ethan finally did. His friend paused briefly after seeing the exhaustion carved into his face. "You cannot keep hiding in that cafe forever." Ethan stared down into the glass of water quietly. "I know. Then why are you there every day?" Ethan looked toward the snowy skyline outside the windows. "Because it is the only place that does not feel fake anymore." Oliver softened slightly, but only slightly. You are talking about a waitress you barely know. Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. That is the strange part. He sat down slowly near the windows, fingers rubbing unconsciously against the folded napkin sketch inside his coat pocket. I think she sees more of me than people who have known me for years. Oliver watched him carefully now. Does she know who you are? Ethan shook his head once. No. And when were you planning to tell her? Ethan's jaw tightened subtly, because that question carried dangerous weight now. At first, Bellamy Café was simply survival. A quiet place to breathe after the bridge. After the panic attacks. After months of waking up every morning feeling nothing except pressure and noise and exhaustion. But somewhere between Claire handing free pastries to lonely customers and laughing at terrible jokes while snow fell outside cafe windows, Ethan stopped merely surviving her presence. He started needing it, which terrified him more than almost anything. I do not know, he admitted finally. Oliver stared at him for several long seconds before speaking carefully. You know this cannot stay simple forever. Ethan looked down at the sketch again. Claire captured his loneliness perfectly with only a pencil and 30 seconds of observation. No one else had ever done that. Not investors. Not reporters. Not Sophia. Not even himself. Nothing about her feels simple, he said quietly. Back downtown, Claire stood beside the apartment window later that night, unable to sleep, while snow continued drifting across Manhattan rooftops beneath pale, yellow streetlights. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch wrapped in blankets while soft jazz played low from an old radio nearby. Claire opened her sketchbook slowly and turned through pages filled with strangers she had drawn over the years. Couples arguing on trains. Children eating ice cream in summer parks. Old men feeding pigeons near Washington Square. Lonely women staring out rainy taxi windows. Tiny moments most people never noticed. Then finally she reached Ethan's page again. She stared at the sketch quietly before adding one more line beneath the drawing in small, careful letters. He looks like someone trying very hard not to fall apart. Claire closed the sketchbook immediately afterward like the words embarrassed her somehow. Because deep down, she already knew something dangerous was happening. Not because Ethan Cole was handsome. Not because he watched her every morning. But because for reasons she still could not explain, when he looked at her, Claire no longer felt invisible. Monday arrived wrapped in freezing rain instead of snow, turning Manhattan sidewalks into rivers of gray slush beneath impatient taxi horns and glowing umbrellas. Bellamy Café filled early with damp coats and exhausted office workers escaping the weather, while soft piano music drifted beneath the low murmur of conversation. Claire stood behind the espresso machine, tying her hair back tighter than usual after sleeping barely 4 hours. Her eyes still burned from staring at hospital payment estimates most of the night. $6,300. The number sat in her chest like a stone she could not swallow. You look haunted, Marcus announced while sliding pastries into the display case. Claire grabbed a towel and threw it weakly at him. Thank you. That is exactly the energy I was aiming for. Marcus grinned. Coffee guy coming in 3, 2. The bell above the cafe door chimed exactly on cue. Claire hated that her heartbeat noticed before the rest of her body did. Ethan stepped inside, shaking rain from his dark umbrella while cold November wind rushed briefly through the warm cafe. He looked exhausted again. Worse than Friday somehow. His tie sat slightly crooked beneath his charcoal coat, like he had dressed in a hurry, or maybe not slept at all. But the moment his eyes found Claire, something in his expression softened instantly. Not dramatically, just enough that she noticed. Enough that Marcus noticed too, because he made an unbearable face behind the pastry case before disappearing into the kitchen, laughing quietly to himself. Morning, Claire said while reaching automatically for his coffee cup. Morning. Ethan removed his gloves slowly. You okay? Claire blinked. You ask me that every day now. You never answer honestly. She looked down at the espresso machine instead of him. Maybe honesty is expensive in New York. Ethan studied her quietly for a second too long. Probably. Claire handed him the Americano before motioning toward his usual table by the rain-covered windows. Outside, people hurried through puddles beneath black umbrellas while steam rose from subway grates into the cold air. Ethan sat down carefully, but unlike usual, he did not open his laptop or check his phone. He just watched her moving through the cafe with the same quiet focus that somehow no longer felt strange. Claire tried not to notice. She failed completely. Around 9:30, Bellamy Café lost power. 1 second, jazz music floated softly through the room. The next, everything vanished into darkness and startled silence except for rain tapping against the windows. Customers groaned immediately while espresso machines died mid-order. Fantastic, Marcus muttered somewhere near the counter. Love this for us. Emergency lights flickered on dimly overhead, bathing the cafe in soft amber shadows that somehow made the room feel smaller and more intimate all at once. Mrs. Green sighed deeply near the register. Transformer issue probably. It happened last winter too. Customers began gathering belongings with disappointed murmurs, while some headed toward the door, already searching for stronger Wi-Fi elsewhere. Claire grabbed candles from beneath the counter automatically. At least nobody can complain the lighting is not romantic now, she joked weakly. Marcus pointed dramatically toward Ethan's corner table. Too late. Window guy has been giving independent film energy for months. Claire rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself while lighting small candles around the cafe. Warm golden light flickered across tables and rain-streaked windows until Bellamy suddenly looked less like a Manhattan coffee shop and more like a quiet memory from another lifetime. Most customers eventually left, but Ethan stayed exactly where he was beside the window, watching rain slide down the glass while candlelight moved softly across his face. Claire approached his table carrying 2 fresh candles. You know you can leave, she said gently. The coffee machine is officially deceased. Ethan glanced up at her. I do not mind. No internet either. Sounds peaceful. Claire smiled faintly while setting the candles down. You are a very strange person. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. You already told me that. Rain hammered harder against the windows now, blurring Manhattan outside into streaks of silver and gold. The cafe suddenly felt disconnected from the rest of the world. Quiet. Suspended. Claire hesitated before sliding into the empty chair across from him. She did not know why she did it. Maybe because there were no customers left to serve. Maybe because the darkness made honesty easier somehow. Or maybe because Ethan looked less lonely in candlelight. So, she said softly, what exactly do you do when you are not mysteriously haunting cafes every morning? Ethan's mouth twitched faintly. Work mostly. That is not an answer. It is technically an answer. Claire rested her chin lightly against her hand. You always dodge personal questions? Ethan looked down briefly at the candle flame between them. Usually. Why? Silence stretched softly for several seconds while rain filled the spaces between them. Finally, Ethan spoke without looking up. Because people treat you differently once they know certain things. Claire studied him carefully. That sounds sad. It is practical. Still sad. Ethan lifted his eyes then, and Claire felt that strange pull again. The feeling that beneath all his calm silence lived something deeply exhausted. What about you? He asked quietly. What about me? You spend all day taking care of strangers. His gaze lowered slightly toward the hospital paperwork corner, sticking from her bag beneath the table. Who takes care of you? Claire looked away instantly. Nobody had asked her that in years. Not seriously. I am fine, she answered automatically. Ethan gave her a small, knowing look. That was not honest either. Claire laughed softly despite herself. See? New Yorkers. Thunder rumbled faintly outside while candlelight danced across the cafe walls. Ethan loosened his tie slightly, and Claire noticed how tired he really looked up close. Not ordinary tired. Bone-deep tired. Like resting no longer fixed whatever hurt inside him. Can I ask you something weird? Claire said after a moment. Ethan nodded once. Why do you sit by the window every single day? He looked toward the rain-covered glass again before answering. Because people reveal who they really are when they think nobody is watching. Claire frowned slightly. That sounds terrifying. It is usually beautiful. Her chest tightened unexpectedly at those words. Ethan said things sometimes that sounded less like conversation and more like someone accidentally opening a locked door. And what exactly have you learned from watching people at Bellamy Café? She asked softly. Ethan's eyes returned to hers slowly. That kindness is quieter than I thought. Claire swallowed once. The candle between them flickered gently while rain blurred the city outside into watercolor shadows. Somewhere behind the counter, Marcus pretended very badly not to spy on them while organizing sugar packets for the 3rd time. You talk like someone who forgot good people existed, Claire murmured carefully. Ethan looked down at his hands. Maybe I did. Something about the honesty in his voice made Claire's heart ache before she could stop it. She wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what happened to him. Who hurt him? Why he looked relieved every time she smiled at him, like surviving another day mattered more than it should. But before she could speak again, Ethan suddenly pressed his fingers lightly against the edge of the table. His breathing changed almost instantly. Small at first, then uneven. Claire straightened slightly. Ethan. He shook his head quickly like he was trying to dismiss it, but color drained from his face beneath the candlelight. His hand tightened against the table hard enough that Claire noticed the tremor in his fingers. Hey, she whispered softly. Look at me. Ethan tried breathing normally and failed. Claire recognized panic immediately. Not because she studied psychology, but because she spent years watching people quietly fall apart in public while pretending they were fine. You are okay? She said gently while leaning closer across the table. Just breathe slower. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Rain thundered outside while candlelight trembled between them. I cannot, he whispered hoarsely. Claire reached carefully across the table, then stopped halfway, uncertain if touching him would help or make things worse. Can I hold your hand? She asked softly. Ethan opened his eyes again, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. After 1 second of hesitation, he nodded. Claire slid her hand carefully across the small candlelit table until her fingers wrapped gently around Ethan's. His skin felt cold despite the warmth inside Bellamy Café, and the tremor in his hand made something ache inside her chest immediately. Rain hammered harder against the windows while thunder rolled somewhere far above Manhattan rooftops. But Claire focused only on the man sitting across from her, struggling quietly to breathe. Look at me, she whispered again. Ethan obeyed instantly, blue eyes unfocused with panic and exhaustion. Claire tightened her fingers slightly around his hand. You are okay. Nothing bad is happening right now. Ethan tried inhaling slowly and failed again. Claire recognized the look because she had seen it once before in a hospital hallway after Mia collapsed during a treatment reaction. That helpless, trapped feeling, like your own body suddenly stopped feeling safe. Listen to my voice, she said softly. Can you do that for me? Ethan nodded faintly. Good. Breathe in slowly. Claire inhaled deeply herself. Like this. Ethan copied her unevenly at first. That is it, she murmured. Again. Candlelight flickered softly between them while rain blurred the city outside into silver shadows. Marcus quietly stopped pretending to clean nearby tables the moment he realized what was happening. Even Mrs. Green looked away discreetly near the counter to give them privacy. Ethan's breathing slowly steadied after several long minutes. Not perfect, but better. Claire kept holding his hand anyway. You came back faster that time, she said gently once his shoulders relaxed slightly. Ethan gave a weak, humorless laugh. That is supposed to be encouraging? Very. His thumb shifted unconsciously beneath her fingers before he seemed to realize she was still holding his hand. Neither of them pulled away immediately. Claire noticed how tired his eyes looked up close now. Not ordinary stress. Something deeper. Older. Do these happen often? She asked carefully. Ethan looked toward the rain-covered windows again. Sometimes. Because of work? Silence. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly before he answered. Because my brain does not know how to stop. Claire understood that more than she wanted to admit. She finally released his hand gently, though part of her strangely did not want to. You should probably talk to somebody, she said softly. Ethan gave her a small, tired smile. I am talking to somebody. Claire looked down quickly to hide the warmth rising unexpectedly into her cheeks. Before either of them could say anything else, the lights suddenly flickered back on across the cafe. Espresso machines hummed loudly to life while jazz music returned overhead, shattering the quiet little world candlelight created around them. Customers near the back applauded sarcastically. Marcus pointed dramatically toward the ceiling. And there goes the emotional atmosphere. Claire laughed softly despite herself while standing from the table. I should probably save the coffee business now. Ethan watched her carefully as she moved toward the counter. Something inside him felt dangerously lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but lighter. Like someone opened a window inside a room he forgot had air. 30 minutes later, the rain finally eased into soft drizzle outside, while Bellamy Café returned to its normal rhythm of steaming milk and laptop screens. Claire wiped down nearby tables absent-mindedly, while Ethan remained by the window longer than usual, his untouched second coffee cooling beside him again. She noticed he looked calmer now, Still tired. Still sad somehow. But calmer. You know, Marcus whispered while stacking plates beside her. If mysterious rich man cries in this cafe, I am charging extra. Claire elbowed him immediately. He was not crying. Marcus raised one eyebrow. Emotionally sweating then. Claire tried not to smile. Failed. Across the room, Ethan's phone buzzed sharply against the table again. This time he glanced at the screen. Sophia Vale. His expression immediately hardened in a way Claire had not seen before. Controlled. Distant. Ethan rejected the call instantly, but seconds later another message appeared. We need to talk before tonight. The board already knows you skipped the meeting again. Ethan rubbed his forehead slowly before locking the screen. Claire noticed the shift in him immediately while carrying fresh coffee toward another customer. Whatever peace settled over him earlier had vanished almost instantly. She hated that she noticed. Around noon, the lunch crowd finally slowed enough for Claire to breathe properly for the first time all day. She leaned against the counter stretching tired shoulders while Mrs. Green counted receipts nearby. Take your break, the older woman said gently. Claire sighed dramatically. You are my favorite person alive. I know. Claire grabbed her coat before slipping outside beneath the awning for air. Manhattan smelled like rain and wet concrete, while yellow taxis hissed through puddles along Lexington Avenue. Steam curled upward from subway grates into cold gray air. Claire closed her eyes briefly and exhaled slowly. Your coffee break looks sadder than your actual coffee. Claire opened her eyes instantly. Ethan stood beside the cafe door holding his coat closed against the wind, watching her carefully. You startled me, she said softly. Sorry. Silence settled comfortably between them for a moment while rain dripped steadily from the awning overhead. Ethan glanced toward the crowded avenue. Do you ever leave Manhattan? Claire laughed quietly. Emotionally or financially? Ethan's mouth twitched faintly again. Either. Not really. She shoved cold hands into her coat pockets. Mia needs doctors nearby, and honestly, I think New York guilt trips people who try to leave. Ethan studied her face carefully. You take care of everyone. Claire looked away toward passing traffic. Someone has to. And who takes care of you? There it was again. That question. Simple, but dangerous. Claire shrugged lightly. I survive. Ethan's expression darkened almost painfully at those words because survival sounded too familiar. Too close to the edge he himself spent months standing beside. That is not the same thing, he said quietly. Claire looked back at him then. Really looked. Rainwater darkened his hair slightly, while cold wind moved around them. But his eyes held something painfully sincere now. Like he genuinely cared about the answer. Which made no sense. They barely knew each other. And yet somehow Ethan noticed every small sadness she tried hiding from the world. You know what I think? Claire said softly after a moment. Ethan shook his head once. I think sad people always choose window seats. Silence. Real silence again. Ethan stared at her like the words physically struck him somewhere deep inside. Claire immediately worried she crossed some invisible line. Sorry, she murmured quickly. That sounded weird. But Ethan shook his head slowly this time. No, his voice sounded rough suddenly. It sounded true. Rain continued tapping softly against the awning above them, while traffic lights reflected across wet streets in blurred red and gold streaks. Claire noticed Ethan looking at her differently now. Not just with curiosity, with recognition. Like somehow she accidentally understood parts of him nobody else did. A black SUV slowly pulled toward the curb across the street, then stopped. Claire recognized it instantly from before. Ethan followed her gaze and sighed quietly beneath his breath. Your security people really ruined the mysterious cafe guy vibe, she teased gently. Ethan almost smiled again before glancing toward the SUV. That is not security. Claire frowned slightly. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out beneath a large black umbrella. Tall, elegant, dark designer coat. The kind of beauty magazines described as timeless. Claire watched the woman cross the street directly toward them, with sharp, confident heels clicking against wet pavement. Ethan's entire posture changed instantly. Tightened. Closed off. Ethan, the woman said coolly once she reached them. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Claire before returning to him. You stopped answering calls again. Claire instinctively stepped back slightly. I should go inside. But before she could move, the woman looked directly at her and smiled politely in that dangerous, polished way wealthy people sometimes did when they were judging someone quietly. And you are? Claire opened her mouth uncertainly. Ethan answered first. Claire works here. Works here. The words should not have hurt. But somehow they did. Claire forced a polite smile, even though something uncomfortable tightened quietly inside her chest. Rain dripped steadily from the cafe awning while taxis hissed through wet Manhattan streets behind them. The elegant woman standing beside Ethan looked perfectly composed despite the weather, her dark coat untouched by chaos in the same impossible way wealthy people often seemed untouched by ordinary life. Sophia Vale. The woman said smoothly while extending one perfectly manicured hand toward Claire. I work with Ethan. Claire shook her hand automatically. Claire Bennett. Sophia's eyes moved briefly over Claire's worn coat and coffee-stained apron before returning to Ethan again. Not cruel. Worse. Dismissive. Like Claire already fit neatly into a category Sophia understood completely. You missed another board meeting, Sophia said calmly to Ethan. 3, technically, he corrected quietly. Sophia sighed through her nose. The investors are furious. Ethan looked exhausted instantly all over again. Claire noticed it immediately. Whatever softness existed between them moments ago vanished the second Sophia arrived. His shoulders tightened. His expression closed off. Like someone putting armor back on. I should really get inside, Claire murmured softly. Ethan glanced toward her quickly. Claire. But she stepped backward already. Enjoy your billionaire emergency. The joke sounded lighter than she actually felt. Ethan watched her disappear back into Bellamy Café while rainwater slid slowly down the cafe windows behind her. Sophia folded her umbrella carefully. A waitress? She asked once Claire was gone. Ethan's eyes hardened immediately. Do not do that. Do what? Talk about her like she is beneath you. Sophia studied him for a long second. Interesting. Ethan rubbed tired fingers against his forehead. Why are you here? Because someone has to drag you back into reality. She glanced toward the glowing cafe windows where Claire moved behind the counter laughing faintly at something Marcus said. This obsession is becoming obvious. Ethan's jaw tightened sharply. It is not an obsession. Sophia tilted her head slightly. Then what exactly is it? Ethan did not answer because he honestly did not know anymore. At first Bellamy Café was survival. Then it became routine. Then somehow Claire Bennett started maturing in ways he could no longer explain logically. The way she smiled at lonely customers. The way she noticed panic before he even spoke. The way she looked at him sometimes like she could see exhaustion hiding beneath expensive suits and carefully controlled silence. Nobody looked at Ethan Cole that way anymore. You disappear every morning to sit in a cafe staring at a woman who has no idea who you really are, Sophia said quietly. That is not healthy, Ethan. He looked toward Claire again through the rain-covered windows. It is the healthiest thing I have done in months. Sophia's expression softened slightly then because beneath all her polished sharpness, she remembered the version of Ethan before everything collapsed. Before panic attacks. Before insomnia. Before the bridge. She does not belong in your world, Sophia said more gently this time. Ethan laughed once without humor. Neither do I lately. Inside Bellamy Café, Claire wiped tables harder than necessary, while Marcus watched her with the expression of someone absolutely dying for gossip. Okay, he whispered dramatically. Tall, expensive woman outside definitely just unlocked the plot twist. Claire rolled her eyes while stacking plates. There is no plot twist. Sweetheart, black SUVs and emotionally unavailable men do not happen in normal coffee shops. Claire tried focusing on work instead of the strange ache settling in her chest. It should not matter that Ethan introduced her as someone who worked there. It was true. She did work there. She served coffee 12 hours a day and counted quarters for laundry money and worried constantly about hospital bills. Meanwhile, women like Sophia looked like they belonged in penthouses overlooking Central Park while discussing mergers over champagne. Different worlds. Obviously different worlds. So why did it sting anyway? Mrs. Green quietly approached beside her. Do not invent sadness where there is none, the older woman said softly. Claire frowned slightly. What? Your face gets quiet when you are hurt. Claire looked away quickly. I am not hurt. Mrs. Green smiled gently. Lying makes wrinkles. Claire laughed weakly despite herself. Across the cafe, Ethan finally stepped back inside, shaking rain from his coat. The moment his eyes found Claire again, guilt flickered briefly across his face. Like he knew exactly what she was thinking. Claire immediately looked down at the counter instead. Coward. Another Americano? Marcus asked loudly with the subtlety of a car accident. Ethan ignored him completely. Claire, he said softly instead. She continued wiping the same perfectly clean spot on the counter. Busy. Ethan stepped closer carefully. You disappeared. You looked occupied. Silence stretched between them while rain tapped softly against the windows again. Claire finally looked up. Your girlfriend seems nice. Ethan blinked once. Sophia is not my girlfriend. Relief hit Claire so quickly, she almost got angry at herself for feeling it. Oh. Ethan studied her expression carefully. We used to be engaged. The relief vanished instantly. Oh. Ethan exhaled quietly. It ended a long time ago. Claire folded her arms lightly. You probably should have mentioned that before the panic attack hand-holding scene. To her surprise, Ethan almost smiled again. That sounds like a very specific movie genre. Claire tried not to smile back and failed a little. Probably foreign film. Ethan leaned lightly against the counter while Marcus aggressively pretended not to listen from 5 feet away. Sophia works with my company now. Ethan explained quietly. That is all. Claire nodded once. Okay. But Ethan still looked unsatisfied somehow. You do not believe me. Claire sighed softly before finally meeting his eyes fully again. Honestly, please. I do not know anything about you. The words landed heavier than she intended. Ethan went still. Claire looked down briefly at the coffee cups between them. I know your coffee order. I know you hate crowded rooms. I know your left hand shakes when you are stressed. Her voice softened. But I do not actually know who you are. Silence settled quietly between them again. Not angry silence. Sad silence. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds while jazz music floated softly through Bellamy Café overhead. Because she was right. Claire knew pieces of him nobody else noticed anymore. But she still did not know the truth. The truth about Cole Venture Group. About headlines. About panic attacks hidden behind billion-dollar presentations. About standing on a bridge 6 months ago wishing the world would finally stop feeling so unbearably loud. Ethan glanced toward the rain outside before speaking quietly. Do you ever feel like people only love versions of you that are useful? Claire looked at him carefully. That is a terrifyingly specific question. Do you? She hesitated. Sometimes. Ethan nodded faintly like her answer confirmed something painful inside him. That is why I do not tell people things. Claire's chest tightened unexpectedly again. Because beneath the expensive coat and mysterious silence, Ethan suddenly sounded deeply lonely. You know what your problem is? She asked softly after a moment. Ethan raised one eyebrow slightly. I was not aware we were diagnosing me now. Too late. Claire leaned against the counter. You spend so much time trying to control how people see you that you forgot how to simply exist around someone. Ethan looked at her carefully now. And you spend so much time taking care of everybody else that you forgot you were allowed to need things too. Neither of them spoke after that because the truth sitting quietly between them suddenly felt too large. Marcus slowly backed farther away with a pastry tray, like someone escaping emotional crossfire. Outside, rain finally began easing into soft mist while evening lights flickered alive across Manhattan streets. Ethan checked his phone again and grimaced slightly. I have to go. Claire nodded once even though disappointment arrived immediately afterward. Ridiculous disappointment. Ethan hesitated before reaching into his coat pocket. Before I forget. He placed something gently on the counter between them. Claire looked down. A brand new sketchbook wrapped in brown paper. Her breath caught slightly. Ethan, your old one is almost full. Claire stared at him. How do you know that? Ethan looked suddenly embarrassed by his own answer. I notice things. Claire touched the wrapped sketchbook carefully with her fingertips. Nobody bought her art supplies since their father left when she was 14. Nobody even remembered she drew except Mia. You did not have to do this. Ethan's voice lowered softly. I wanted to. Claire looked back up at him slowly. And there it was again. That dangerous feeling. Like somehow this quiet, complicated man saw parts of her she stopped believing anyone noticed anymore. Claire did not open the sketchbook until almost midnight. The apartment was quiet except for the old radiator hissing unevenly beneath the windows and soft rain tapping against the fire escape outside. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch halfway through a movie neither of them were really watching. One arm curled beneath her blanket, while city lights flickered softly across the tiny living room. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table, staring at the brown paper wrapping in her lap, like it contained something far more dangerous than blank pages. Ethan's voice still lingered somewhere in her mind. I noticed things. Nobody noticed things anymore. Not in New York. People notice prices, deadlines, status, but not details. Not cracked sketchbook bindings, or exhausted smiles, or hands shaking slightly after hospital phone calls. Claire carefully peeled the paper back and froze for a second when she saw the sketchbook inside. Leather-bound, thick ivory pages. Expensive enough that she immediately became uncomfortable holding it. Tucked beneath the front cover was a folded receipt from a tiny art store in Soho. Nothing flashy. No note. No dramatic message. Just a receipt because Ethan somehow understood that kindness felt safer when it did not demand gratitude. Claire swallowed hard unexpectedly. That bad? Mia's sleepy voice startled her. Claire looked up quickly. You are awake. Mia sat up slowly beneath the blanket, blonde hair tangled around tired eyes. Hard to sleep when you are staring at paper like it proposed marriage. Claire laughed softly and held up the sketchbook. Mia blinked once. Whoa. Exactly. Coffee guy bought that. Claire nodded slowly. Mia whistled quietly. That man is down catastrophically. Claire threw a couch pillow at her immediately. Stop. Mia grinned weakly despite exhaustion. Claire, that sketchbook probably costs more than our microwave. Claire looked down at it again. That is the problem. Why? Claire hesitated. Because people do not give things like this without expecting something. Mia's expression softened instantly. You really believe that? Claire traced her fingers lightly across the leather cover. Experience suggests yes. Silence settled quietly around them, while rain drifted softly beyond the windows. Finally, Mia spoke carefully. Or maybe he just likes seeing you happy. Claire looked away too quickly, because that possibility somehow scared her more. Across Manhattan, Ethan stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring down at rain-covered streets 32 floors below, while Oliver paced nearby, holding tomorrow morning's presentation notes. You cannot keep canceling interviews, Oliver said sharply. The market already thinks something is wrong. Ethan loosened his tie slowly without answering. And Sophia says you disappeared again today. Ethan glanced toward him tiredly. Sophia exaggerates. Oliver laughed once without humor. You missed 2 investor calls, ignored 6 board members, and spent another entire afternoon in a coffee shop. Ethan turned back toward the windows. Bellamy Café. What? It has a name. Oliver stared at him for several seconds before sitting down heavily on the couch. Jesus Christ. Ethan almost smiled faintly. Almost. Silence stretched between them while rain reflected silver against the glass. Finally, Oliver sighed. Do you know what scares me? Ethan waited. You look more alive talking about that cafe than you do talking about your own company. Ethan's expression dimmed slightly because Oliver was right. Cole Venture Group used to feel like purpose, ambition, legacy. Now it mostly felt like noise. Endless noise. Meetings. Expectations. Headlines. Investors wanting pieces of him until nothing human remained underneath. But Bellamy Café smelled like cinnamon and coffee and ordinary life. Claire laughed too loudly when Marcus annoyed her. She drew strangers when she thought nobody noticed. She treated lonely people gently without needing recognition for it. Around her, Ethan remembered what breathing normally felt like. She does not know who I am, Ethan said quietly after a while. Oliver rubbed tired eyes. And how long exactly were you planning to keep it that way? Ethan looked down at the folded napkin sketch still resting near the kitchen counter. Some people look lonely even in warm rooms. As long as possible. Oliver shook his head slowly. That is not fair to her. Ethan knew that too, which was exactly why guilt kept growing heavier every time Claire smiled at him. Tuesday morning arrived sharp and cold beneath pale winter sunlight, reflecting off wet sidewalks and lingering rain puddles across Manhattan. Claire stepped into Bellamy Café carrying the leather sketchbook carefully against her chest before immediately hiding it beneath the counter so Marcus could not emotionally interrogate her for 6 straight hours. Unfortunately, Marcus noticed anyway within 12 seconds. New sketchbook? He gasped dramatically. Claire pointed a warning finger immediately. Do not. Oh my God, mysterious rich man bought you emotionally significant art supplies. You are exhausting. Marcus leaned across the counter whispering loudly. That is basically marriage in Brooklyn. Claire laughed despite herself while tying her apron tighter around her waist. But beneath the laughter lived nervous anticipation she could not quite hide from herself. Because now every time the bell above the cafe door moved, her heart reacted before logic caught up. Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. At exactly 8:15, the bell chimed. Claire looked up automatically. But Ethan did not walk in. Her stomach dropped slightly before she could stop it. Marcus noticed instantly. "Oh no," he whispered dramatically. "You miss him." Claire grabbed a towel and threw it at his face. "I am literally begging you to get a hobby." But as minutes passed, disappointment settled quietly beneath her ribs anyway. By 9 a.m., she stopped pretending she was not checking the door every few seconds. By 10 a.m., she became annoyed at herself for caring. Maybe Billionaire Batman got busy, Marcus offered while making cappuccinos. Claire frowned. Why does everyone think he is a billionaire? Marcus stared at her blankly. Claire, that man wears coats that look more expensive than my rent. Before she could answer, the bell above the cafe door finally chimed again. Claire turned instantly. Ethan stepped inside looking colder than usual, dark circles beneath his eyes sharper this morning, while snowflakes melted slowly against his coat. But what caught Claire's attention immediately was the split skin across his knuckles like he had been gripping something too tightly all night. You are late, she said before thinking. Ethan blinked once in surprise. Claire froze internally. Great. Casual. Normal. Ethan's mouth softened slightly at the edges. I did not realize I had a curfew. Claire crossed her arms lightly, trying to recover dignity. Your coffee almost filed a missing person report. Ethan looked genuinely tired, but somehow warmer at the same time. Sorry. She handed him his Americano automatically, while studying him more carefully. You look terrible. Thank you. You are welcome. Ethan glanced toward the counter. His eyes landed immediately on the edge of the leather sketchbook, barely visible beneath a stack of menus. You brought it. Claire touched the cover lightly with her fingertips. Yeah. Ethan watched her carefully. Do you like it? Claire hesitated because honesty suddenly felt dangerous around him. Too much. Something vulnerable flickered briefly across Ethan's expression then. Relief maybe. Good. Their eyes held quietly while morning sunlight spilled across the cafe windows behind him. Claire noticed his breathing looked steadier today. Less tight. Less fragile. But sadness still lingered beneath everything about him like background music he could not turn off completely. Did you sleep at all? She asked softly. Ethan looked down at the coffee cup warming his hands. Not really. Claire frowned slightly. Panic attack. Ethan glanced up, surprised she remembered so easily. Something like that. Without thinking, Claire reached across the counter and slid a warm chocolate croissant toward him. On the house. Ethan looked at it. I thought your business strategy was already terrible. Claire smiled faintly. It is getting worse. For the first time all morning, Ethan laughed softly enough that the sound actually reached his eyes. And standing there beneath the warm cafe lights with snow drifting slowly outside the windows, Claire realized something terrifying. The quiet, lonely man who walked into Bellamy Cafe every morning no longer felt like a stranger anymore. For the next 2 weeks, Bellamy Cafe became the center of Ethan's life in ways he no longer knew how to explain to himself. Every morning at exactly 8:15, the bell above the cafe door chimed, and somehow the noise inside his head quieted the moment he saw Claire Bennett standing behind the counter with loose blonde hair, tired eyes, and that stubborn smile she gave the world no matter how exhausted she looked. Manhattan moved brutally fast outside the cafe windows. Stock markets shifted. Reporters chased scandals. Investors demanded certainty. But inside Bellamy, time slowed into smaller things. Coffee steam curling upward beneath warm lights. Jazz humming softly overhead. Claire sketching absent-mindedly on napkins between customers while pretending she was not watching Ethan watching her. You are staring again, she teased one Thursday morning while refilling his Americano. Ethan looked up from the table near the window. I am observant. Claire placed one hand dramatically against her chest. That sounds significantly creepier somehow. Ethan surprised her by smiling immediately this time. Not the small, almost smiles from before. A real one. Quiet, but genuine enough that Claire froze for half a second because she realized suddenly how handsome he looked when sadness was not pulling everything downward. Ethan noticed her staring this time too. What? Claire blinked quickly. Nothing. You look surprised. I just realized your face does know how to smile. Ethan laughed softly beneath his breath while shaking his head. God, Claire thought helplessly, he sounds different lately. Lighter somehow. Not healed, but less lost. Even Marcus noticed. You did something to him, he whispered dramatically while drying glasses behind the counter later that afternoon. Claire frowned. What does that mean? Marcus pointed discreetly toward Ethan sitting near the window reading emails with one hand while eating the chocolate croissant she left beside his coffee without asking. That man walked in here a month ago looking like a divorced funeral director. Claire nearly laughed into the espresso machine. Marcus continued proudly. Now he looks like somebody remembered sunlight exists. Claire tried not to smile, but failed anyway, because part of her noticed it too. Ethan still carried sadness around him like winter air, but now there were moments where it loosened slightly. Moments where he laughed quietly at her jokes or listened while she talked about meaningless things like subway musicians and terrible tourists and why pigeons in New York walked with irrational confidence. And somehow Ethan always listened like every word mattered. That terrified her more than it should. Friday evening arrived colder than expected, sharp wind sweeping through Manhattan streets while Bellamy Café slowly emptied beneath soft golden lights. Claire wiped down tables near closing time while Ethan remained at his usual seat by the window, laptop open but untouched for almost 20 minutes now. He was watching snowfall instead. Or maybe thinking. It was hard to tell with him sometimes. You planning to actually work tonight? Claire asked while stacking empty mugs. Ethan looked toward her slowly. Probably not. Wow. Claire pretended shock. Your corporation survives without you? Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. Barely. Claire smiled faintly while walking closer. You know, normal people usually leave coffee shops when they close. Ethan glanced around Bellamy Café quietly. I think this is the only place I like lately. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard again. Ethan always sounded most sincere when he least intended to. Claire looked down briefly at the fresh sketch filling one page of her leather notebook. Ethan near the window again. Snow outside. Coffee untouched. Sad eyes softer now than before. She closed the notebook quickly before he noticed. Too late. Was that me? He asked quietly. Claire sighed dramatically. You are impossible to hide from. Ethan's mouth softened slightly. Can I see? Claire hesitated. Maybe when I become emotionally stable. So never. She laughed despite herself before sliding into the chair across from him. Outside, snow drifted slowly through glowing Manhattan streetlights while inside Bellamy Café, everything felt warm and suspended from the rest of the world again. Mrs. Green quietly counted receipts near the register while Marcus mopped dramatically to sad jazz music in the background. Ethan looked at Claire carefully across the table. You look tired. Claire groaned softly. Please do not start. Start what? The concerned staring. Ethan looked genuinely confused. I do not think I do that. Claire gave him a look. Ethan, you literally look at me like you are trying to solve emotional algebra. For the first time in days, Ethan laughed fully. The sound startled both of them slightly. Real laughter looked beautiful on him. Dangerous realization. Claire looked away quickly before her face betrayed something stupid. Ethan noticed anyway because of course he did. What? He asked softly. Claire shook her head immediately. Nothing. Silence settled comfortably for a moment before Claire's phone suddenly buzzed sharply against the table. Midtown Medical Center flashed across the screen. Her stomach dropped instantly. Ethan noticed the shift in her face before she even answered. Hello. Claire's voice tightened immediately. The nurse on the other end sounded calm, but serious. Miss Bennett, your sister experienced another severe reaction after treatment this evening. Claire stood up too quickly, chair scraping hard against the floor. What happened? She is stable now, but the doctor wants to keep her overnight for observation. Claire pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. I am coming right now. There are additional forms we need you to complete when you arrive. Additional forms. Additional bills. Additional impossible numbers she already could not afford. Claire closed her eyes hard for 1 second before hanging up. Ethan stood immediately. Claire. She grabbed her coat too fast, breathing uneven now. I have to go. What happened? My sister. Her voice cracked slightly despite trying to hold it together. Hospital. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Focused. Concerned. Real. I will drive you. Claire shook her head automatically. No. It is okay. Claire. Seriously. She forced a quick smile that looked painfully fake. Subway is faster this time of night. Ethan stepped closer anyway. You should not go alone upset. Something about the gentleness in his voice almost shattered the fragile control she still had left. Claire looked away quickly before emotion reached her eyes. I am fine. Ethan stared at her quietly. You keep saying that like repetition makes it true. Claire swallowed hard. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too small, too close to crying. I cannot do this right now, she whispered. Ethan softened instantly at the fear buried beneath her voice. Okay. He paused carefully. Then let me at least walk you outside. Claire nodded once, because refusing felt impossible suddenly. Together they stepped out into freezing Manhattan air while snow drifted softly around glowing streetlights and passing taxis. Bellamy Café glowed warmly behind them against the dark avenue. Claire shoved trembling hands into her coat pockets while waiting near the curb for a cab. Ethan stood beside her in silence for a moment before quietly removing his scarf and wrapping it gently around her neck before she could protest. The warmth still carried his cologne faintly. Cedarwood and winter. You do not have to keep saving everybody alone, he said softly. Claire looked up at him then, eyes bright with exhaustion and fear and something dangerously close to trust. You say things like you know me. Ethan's expression shifted almost painfully at those words because the truth sat heavy behind them now. He did know her. Better than she realized. Better than he probably should. A taxi finally pulled toward the curb, spraying slush across the street. Claire opened the door quickly before courage disappeared completely. I will see you tomorrow? Ethan asked quietly through the falling snow. Claire hesitated for one tiny dangerous second before answering. Yeah. Then she disappeared into the cab while Ethan stood alone beneath the winter lights watching it drive away. But neither of them noticed the black sedan parked half a block away, or the photographer inside lowering his camera slowly after capturing every second of Ethan Cole wrapping his scarf around a waitress outside Bellamy Café.